What is the creepiest thing that's happened to you personally that made you question reality? I have 2 wireless mouses, one for a work laptop and one for my personal laptop. When I let things get messy, I usually just stack one laptop on top of the closed one underneath, with both mouses near the mousepad. Okay, so I get a call from work saying I need to hop online. I open the work laptop and grab the mouse and start opening my work portal. I open email. I do my usual routine. Everything works fine. Then, I realize that I'm using the mouse connected to my personal laptop on my work laptop. I shake the mouse. No response. It stopped working once I realized that it shouldn't be working. Ever since then, I've found it hard to believe that we don't live in some sort of a simulation. When I was a kid between 8 or 9, I used to wake up every night to headlights coming through my bedroom window. The lights would then stop and turn off, not as if a car drove by but as if they were turned off. Then the long shadows of a man, as if they were looking through my window, would pass by and stop in front of my window. I would lay really still and pretend nothing happened, every night for months. Eventually I convinced myself it was imagination. Now that I think back, it stopped when my stepdad moved in. My mom was single, but I was convinced it wasn't real. Across the street lived my best friend whose mom was also single and she refused to sleep in her bedroom. Her window faced my window. She told me years later it was because every night a man would park in her side yard and walk over to my yard. The long shadows were from the light in her yard. She eventually decided it was my dad checking on us and never told me until I was a teenager. It wasn't my dad. I asked him. So I thought I was crazy and hallucinating for years, and perhaps I wasn't, or 2 kids were having odd dreams at the same time every night. I was playing with our dog in the living room. At the time I was around 9 years old. We were doing our usual only play like this when mom isn't home else she'll tell us to stop type of playing. So basically playing fetch in the living room. At one point I threw the toy which caused it to ricochet out of the living room into the kitchen. Franz, our dog's name, chased it and disappeared around the corner to get it. At that exact moment the front door opened and mom walked in with Franz on a leash after a 2-hour walk over the beach and dunes. I tried to explain, but can't. I played with him for at least 15 minutes in apparently my imagination, but I just don't believe that. When he's such a good boy he learns how to astral project to play with you while he's away. When I was 15 I was home alone hanging out upstairs in my bedroom. At the time we had 2 small dogs. I was sitting in my room watching TV when the dogs started going crazy barking downstairs. It wasn't uncommon for them to bark when a person walked by or came to the door, so I just stayed in my room and thought nothing of it at first. They kept barking, non-stop, for probably about 10 minutes before I finally got fed up and decided to go downstairs to tell them to stop it. The stairs in my house led into the kitchen. As soon as I reached the bottom I saw him. A very tall man in a pea jacket and top hat stood in the doorway between my kitchen and dining room. I could see no face. I bolted back upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom where I called my parents. In the time I was waiting for them to come home I began hearing several seemingly aggravated, male voices outside the bathroom door. I was absolutely terrified. Eventually my aunt arrived at my house to check on me. The voices faded and I was able to calm down. About 2 years ago I got a phone call from my mother, telling me she had been reading the local, very small town, paper and there was an article in it about my childhood home, written by the town historian. The house, built in 1805, had once been a local gathering spot for the elite of the small village. The first floor, now the kitchen, dining room and living room, had once been a parlor and tavern of sorts, while the second floor of the house functioned as a dance hall. But things in the house had been rearranged a bit. The staircase, being one of those things, had been moved from what was now a second floor bedroom closet, which would exit downstairs between the kitchen and dining room. My family was slightly aware of this but never had the exact details of it. Very cool, I thought, until my mom continued reading. In 1836 there was an accident. 3 men got into an argument about their differing political views, 2 of them against the other. The disagreement ended with the 3rd man being pushed over the railing at the top of the stairs, landing at the base of the stairs, where he slowly suffered from, and eventually succumbed to his injuries. The spot where he died was the exact spot I had seen the faceless man in the top hat almost 15 years ago. My mom clipped the news article and my father framed it and hung it in the dining room, right near the doorway into the kitchen. An hour later, while my father was home alone, he heard a crash. Upon investigation, he found the clipped article in its shattered frame, laying face down, 15 feet from where he had hung it. I always knew what I had seen and heard was supernatural. Now you'll never convince me otherwise. You'll also never convince me to stay in that house alone again. I worked at a small retail shop that sold mostly small accessories and clothes. I have never really believed in ghosts, but my co-workers always swore the place was haunted. Lights would flicker randomly and canvases would fall violently to the ground despite my efforts of propping them up so that they didn't. The thing that really made me question everything happened when I was closing alone at night. We had a sunglasses display in the middle of the store. Just a flat glass shelf with a bunch of sunglasses laid out nicely on top. I walk past it to the register and hear this huge crash. Look back and all of the sunglasses were on the floor. It looked like somebody just took their arm and dragged it across the shelf, pushing them all off. There wasn't anything above the display, so nothing could have knocked it off. I don't have an explanation for it. It was right as I was about to close to. He was a rude ghost. It didn't want to be left alone, so it made a mess to make you stay longer. I dreamed it was dark, raining, and I was in the woods walking towards a campfire. There were 3 men around it whom I had never seen before. One was wearing a shirt and pants with huge white and black horizontal stripes on it, such as a prisoner might wear. I could not figure out why I was not scared in my dream. Fast forward 10 months later, we're hunting and camping. A friend brings along 3 of his friends that we had never met before. I have to go to the bathroom, buried a 50-gallon drum and put a seat on it, and my husband walks with me since it's dark. We start back and it starts to rain. We get to the clearing and there are his 3 friends around the fire, one wearing the outfit described above. I wasn't afraid in my dream because my husband was behind me and I just couldn't see him. No one believes me. I was young, around 9, and my brother was 4. We were in our living room. He was in the middle of the room, and suddenly a fork that was on my couch just flew to him and landed in front of his feet. He laughed and I pretty much pretended it never happened. Little telekinetic bro telling you to fork off. So, I'm a die-hard atheist, but I can't fully explain this one. I have a big family, like really big. Last count, I had around 20 cousins. One day we were all hanging out in the family farm and decided to spend the night. We just did girls in a room and boys in another, and everything was going fine. It was around 4 in the morning when I woke up to one of my cousins standing by the door. The hallway light was on and shining on my face, so I could only see his outline, but I knew it was Josh. I asked him what was he doing and if he needed something, but he didn't move, and my eyes were starting to adjust. I could see more details, but I couldn't see his face. I was really sleepy and confused when the hallway light, Josh's shape, everything disappeared. It was just darkness and an open door. I knew I was awake because I was sitting down. I decided to get one of my roommate cousins up and go check on the boys. Josh had an allergy to something. He didn't wanted to bother anyone, so he took a Benadryl and went to bed. When I checked on him, he wasn't breathing. We got my uncle up. He gave Josh some heavy-duty medication, and we took him to a hospital. Everyone was fine. Josh told me he knew I was insomniac, and while he was suffocating, unable to make a noise, he kept praying I couldn't sleep, and decided to check on him. Talking with my son when he was 3 or 4 years old while he was playing with a Darth Vader toy in his mom's lap. Talking about the Wiggles or Barney or whatever, completely unprompted. He said nonchalantly, "Dingo cold, dingo cold," and goes back to playing with his Star Wars toys. I asked him what he said and he denied saying anything with a giggle. My wife very clearly heard him say dingo cold too. I never told him about my childhood best friend, Dingo, being killed in an avalanche 10 years earlier. I'm debating on ever having kids now. I once had the weirdest dream. It was like 3 years ago, yet I remember it clearly, which is weird knowing how bad my memory is. Anyway, it was a big black room. There was a huge TV on the wall which had white static on it. Staring at the TV were 2 men in fully black suits with white shirts. One had long blonde hair and the other one had short black hair. In this dream it was like I was only watching like in a movie. I did not have a body. Suddenly one man says but then her brother will die, to which the short-haired guy silently nods. The same day my mother comes home crying telling me my uncle has committed suicide. I do not believe in ghost and faith, so I still question this dream today. In 1984, I was 14, was on a ferry heading to London. I was talking to some guys from India. They said they were going to kill Indira Gandhi. Few months later she was assassinated. I think about that from time to time. Sitting alone as a young guy in the living room. Empty house with no one home. I'm holding a big cup of soda in my lap watching TV, when an unmistakable voice, strong and clear but only in my head, tells me to pour the soda into my lap. I was like, well, that's a strange stray thought to have, but then it said it again and I felt my hand tipping. Next thing I knew I poured the soda into my lap. I'm sitting there for a second staring at the ceiling wondering how big an idiot I am to actually do this. When I look down, my lap is completely dry with no soda residue, and my soda cup is empty. I know, not that exciting, but I wish I knew what had happened. By my hometown there was a hiking trail that people went to very infrequently. It was along the side of the Niagara Escarpment, so it had some climbable cliffs and some very shallow caves that you could crawl around on. I went with some friends when I was 19/20 and we were crawling around and found a cave that went pretty deep. We had never been in there before, had never even seen it before. So we pushed forward and decided to check it out even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have a flashlight function. We stepped into the cave and it was easily 20-30 degrees cooler than outside. Upon looking around with which light we had, we noticed it was really clean inside the cave, as in it didn't have beer cans littered everywhere like all the other small caves did. While in there we got a really eerie feeling after being in there shortly, hearing weird and strange things, feeling like we were being touched, poked and pulled, and not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was too dark. We were just using lighters to see what was around us. We were convinced one of us was messing with the others. Although anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all decently far apart. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes, convinced to come back with flashlights. We came out to see that it was now dusk outside. When we entered it was midday. Somehow we had lost roughly 3 hours inside of this cave. We went back with flashlights the next week, but have never been able to find this cave again. Only mildly creepy, but definitely made me question reality. Me and a friend were sitting about in my room playing video games etc. when out of nowhere there was this insanely loud pop. My ears were ringing, it was so loud. We both instantly looked at each other thinking one of us had caused it, but neither of us have a clue what happened. It sounded as though it came from thin air in the middle of the room. I have a lot of really weird experiences in my life that made me question reality, but this is my most recent weirdness. My mother died a year and a half ago. My stepdad couldn't handle it, so he packed up and left their house. He let the mortgage company take it back and it has sat empty since she passed. The house is on a hill and they have a huge barn in the field below the house an acre away. A few weeks ago my sister, who lives down the road from the house, called me and tells me the lights were on in mom's bedroom and all the barn lights were on. Hours pass and her husband decided to go up the hill to the house. He walks in the door and walked to the light switch to shut off the lights to the barn. He switched the barn lights off and all the lights went off. The inside and outside lights just shut off at the same time. He freaked a little bit and switched it back on, but there was nothing. No lights, no power, no anything. He turns around and leaves as fast as he could. The power had been off for over a year at that point. We assumed the mortgage company had turned on the power at first, but they haven't. The service is still off. There were probably 12 lights running on that phantom power. Had a dream where my boss hurt his back and he couldn't work that day. He came out with his shirt off and informed me that I would still be working that day. He was a slave driver, so that didn't surprise me. I wake up from the dream and head to work. A buddy picks me up and we drive to his house. I told my buddy about the dream and we both laughed, knowing my boss would probably do that. I knock on the door and no one comes. But I heard the garage door open, so I walked over to see if he was in there. He opens the door with no shirt on and the exact same conversation I had in my dream unfolds in front of me, word for word, and no one would have even believed me had I not told my buddy a moment earlier. I always remember this and do not have an explanation for it. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and walking to the stairs. I remember closing my eyes for a second at the top of the stairs, and when I opened them I would be at the bottom of the stairs. I would run upstairs and close my eyes and the same thing would happen again. It happened at least 4 or 5 times until my parents called me to go to bed because they could hear me run up the steps. It's weird because I was wide awake and do not have a history with sleepwalking. I still think about it and wonder how that was possible. At least 6 times in my life I've gone home. I know I locked the door, but when I'm about to put my key in, the door opens like someone was expecting me but no one's there. It's happened at my mom's house, my house, and other PPLS houses. I was helping my buddy move into his new house, and when we came back with more stuff I had to pee, so I ran to the front door and it opened. When he came in he said he locked it before we left. Don't know what it is, but maybe it's a superpower. Lazy telekinesis. Nice. I am at in our college's anatomy class, which takes place in the cadaver lab. Dead bodies. Late one night, I am working alone in the cadaver lab and I start to hear a noise. It's hard to tell what the noise sounds like, but it's a consistent muffled noise. So I kind of walk around the room and locate it. Now normally the bodies are all kept in these big metal crates, but at the time we had one more body than we did crate. So one body was in a plastic body bag and that's where the noise was coming from. So I am terrified at this point, all alone in the lab, looking down at this plastic body bag that I can see the outline of the body that presumably is coming back to life because it is definitely making noise. I stood over this body for a solid minute, debating whether I should open the bag, and finally the noise just stops. I got all my stuff together and bolted from the lab. A couple weeks later, the professor tells me to be careful if I ever work on that body because there is a live pacemaker in it, so don't cut into that, and it will vibrate and ring every few hours if it's low on battery. I let out the biggest sigh of relief that we weren't haunted. Sleep paralysis. A few years ago, I was dreaming I was talking to a friend of mine. So far, nothing weird. But then, for some reason, I realized that I was in a dream and the person I was talking with technically wasn't my friend. Suddenly, their appearance turned to black and I felt them pushing me down and holding me down in my bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. At this point my cat woke up and jumped on me as if to protect me. Then, the dark silhouette or whatever that thing was vanished and I woke up. I swear I had red marks my shoulders where that thing was holding me down in my dream. Okay, this was recently and it still freaks me out. I was playing VR chat with my HTC Vice. I was sitting in my chair and just talking with friends when I all of a sudden heard something fall down, or like someone tripped over something. Just some rumbling noise. I got confused because I was alone at home, so I lifted up my VR glasses and looked around in my room. I thought maybe something just simply fall down, but I couldn't find anything that looked different. And then all of a sudden I saw a chocolate bar wrapping on the floor, perfectly neatly placed right in front of me and with the font even facing to me. Obviously I got confused and picked it up and looked at it. So the chocolate was missing. It was just the wrapping. But the problem is, I never bought this chocolate, nor did I eat it, nor did I ever even had this kind of chocolate. It was normal chocolate with nuts and grapes and I'm not keen on those. And it was just laying there. I never found out how it got there and I never found out what the noise was I heard. I am still so confused and almost a bit scared by it. I had a dream twice. In this dream I was on the most beautiful island surrounded by the most beautiful emerald sea. I woke on one of those long chairs near the beach and was approached by an old jolly man that told me, "Everything is okay, we just have some traffic." That in a couple of minutes I was going to be back home. That I enjoyed myself. Meanwhile, the island had other people. Everyone relaxed. I made small chat with some guy, and he asked me where I was from. I told him the name of the city I live in. He replied to me that he had never heard about it, and he also named his own city something like Sector R61. That was weird, but in this island I was unable to freak out, or get mad or anything. I was relaxed all the time, so I know nothing of it. Also, he didn't look 100% human. Eventually the old man returned and told me that everything was solved now and that I was ready to go back. The next thing I knew is that I was awake in my bedroom at 7 AM exactly, completely relaxed and felt in top condition. Sounds like someone or something messed up while you were dreaming, so they put you into an interdimensional vacation until they could place you back into your reality. My wife and I had a 2-hour drive back from St. Louis to our home, during which both of us lost time. Woke up 3 hours later, still an hour and a half away from home, only having used enough gas to go that half hour, and our GPS showed we had been driving our normal route. We still have no freaking idea what happened, but we know we hadn't pulled over and that neither of us had any memory between taking an exit and seeing this one particular billboard for a restaurant we always pass. Still freaks me the frick out. There was an old man who lived on the road I drove every day to get to the highway. He sat on his front porch drinking his morning coffee, and he always waved at me when I drove by, and I always waved back. This went on for the better part of a decade. One day I was talking to my neighbor about how much Mr. So-and-so waving made my morning awesome, and I was glad he was still kicking around. My neighbor says, "Wait, what? He has been dead for 3 years. Never saw him again. Who was I waving at?" One morning I woke up to my alarm going off at 6:30 as usual and got up and cooked breakfast. As soon as I sat down to eat, my alarm went off again and I woke up in bed. I dreamed that I woke up and went about my morning routine. That was easily the most disorienting thing I've ever experienced. I used to live out in the country. My house was in the middle of 4 large fields that usually grew corn. We had a large bay window facing out towards the nearest neighbor, over the field with a row of short bushes in front of it. One night I'm sitting alone watching TV beside this window. Mom is out smoking and my sister was in her room. The window is cracked open a bit so I can occasionally hear rustling of birds and such in the bushes. Window is open for airflow, not just to listen to birds. All of a sudden all noise stops and a small, frail voice comes from outside the window. "Help me." I freeze. Still no noise outside after the voice. Nothing else was said that I could hear, and I didn't move until my mom came back in. I asked if she heard anything, which she replies no with a confused look. I didn't bother to tell her about what I heard because I didn't want to sound crazy, but that day will always stick with me. Woke up to my granddad stood by the door staring at me. Scared the crap out of me, and there was a flash and he was gone. He's been dead about 7 or 8 years at that point. I asked my mum, she said yeah, he often did that. He'd wake my nan up for work by knocking on the window. Mum dead, grandpa stared at me through my door today. Yeah, he does that. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.